Yes, to some extent, especially the electricity sector, as we've seen both in Europe and in the US and other developed countries, despite many efforts to deregulate the sector and allow new entrants to come in, what we've observed in the past 20 years is that incumbent suppliers have remained as very dominant players. And it's been very difficult for newcomers to challenge the incumbent large players. So that is one major obstacle towards more competition in the electricity sector. But even when there is competition, when new entrants come in, it's been very difficult to convince consumers to consider, and more than to consider, to actually switch to new entrants. And so what we've seen is that after all these years, incumbent players still have a very large market share, and prices have not gone down in the retail sector. So in a way, I think it's fair to say it's been one of the big failures in deregulation. Many other sectors have succeeded, like telecommunications. The electricity sector has not, to a great extent. Wholesale electricity markets, they're very complex. They involve many players. They're a combination of, I would say, in terms of techniques, engineering, computer science, and economics. I think it's an effort that's been developed in the past few years, but there's still a lot to be done, combining auction theory, combinatorics, and a variety of important and difficult techniques. I think there are many gains that are possible in there, and it's an area where research and practice can go together well. A second one, I was talking about consumer choices before, and one of the reasons why the deregulation of the sector has not succeeded as much as one would have expected or liked to, I think is largely because of the type of behavior that we observe by consumers. Consumers are frequently confused about electricity contracts. It's not something that they understand well as they would understand any other consumer good. And so there's still a lot to be done in terms of trying to understand consumer behavior in markets like electricity markets. And I think that's an important step towards implementing reforms in the sector that will allow for effective greater competition, not just the type of limited competition we've seen in the past. Yes. For example, the whole idea of trying to understand the supply of electricity, especially in a world with many decentralized suppliers, like in terms of solar or wind or other renewables. For example, how do I estimate the real cost and the real benefit from wind energy? It's difficult because there's a lot of uncertainty, the uncertainty of nature. Same thing is true for solar, by the way. And from an economic and an engineering point of view, that creates challenges that we do not find in other sectors, at least not in this way. Most of the sectors have a very well-defined production function. You have certain inputs, you get a certain output. In energy, in particular with electricity, things are a lot more complicated. And so from a point of view of organizing supply, that creates challenges that you do not find in other sectors, I would say. From a consumer point of view, for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, I also think that it's a sector that has a number of specificities in the sense that the product is very complex. It requires a certain degree of sophistication on the part of the consumer to understand what are the costs and benefits of different plans. In a way, it's a little bit like financial services. It's another field where it's quite difficult for consumers to be aware of what their options are and to behave optimally. I think the energy sector, in particular electricity, also has those features, which make these sectors very different from, consumer goods, for example.